Welcome back. Joining me now is National Senator Matt Canavan and Labor MP Joel Fitzgibbon. You're both in Canberra. Welcome, both of you. Look, Joel, I want to start with the
G'day, Shari.
piece. Good day. I want to start with a piece you wrote, Joel, in the Daily Telegraph a couple of days ago. You're a former Defence Minister. You visited Afghanistan 2007, and you've written this great piece, or a fascinating piece, basically arguing that, you know, our SAS soldiers that we sent over to Afghanistan, who served as part of the Special Operations Task Group, were subject to some very high expectations, and that we pushed their mental resilience. You even say that there were shades of Vietnam. In what way?
That's right, Shari. There are five key priorities here in my view. The first, of course, are the Afghan victims and their families, and we have to be very strident in our expressions of regret and consider compensation for them. Then, of course, there are those who have alleged to have committed this unlawful action, and by necessity they'll need to pay a high price for what they've done, and they no doubt will. The third group, of course, are the overwhelming majority of Special Forces soldiers who've done only the right thing and done no more than put their lives literally on the line for their country. Indeed, too many made the ultimate sacrifice under the Australian flag. And we need to protect their reputation, the reputation of the regiments, and we need to continue to honour them and respect them and to be thankful to them for what they've done for their country. The next group, of course, includes those who are ultimately responsible for what we saw in the Brereton report. Now, we've seen a lot of talk about those beyond the wire or in overseas operations, but I think that sometime soon we need to have a bigger conversation about those much further up the line, right up at the top of the chain of command and right into the room where the National Security Committee of the Cabinet meets. I think we all bear some responsibility for what went wrong in Afghanistan, and we all have to wear that and I think respond to that. The last group are those soldiers who so courageously and bravely belled the cat, the whistleblowers, those who in the face of bullying and intimidation were determined that the long-term future of the regiment be protected by getting this out into the open, dealt with decisively, and therefore rebuilding the respect in the Australian community for both the Commando Regiment and, of course, our Special Air Service Regiment.
Look, just in terms of that one group, you know, who did, or it's alleged that they did commit war crimes. Matt, Joel's arguing that there actually should be an inquiry. That's what he says in this piece, that there should be an inquiry into the ADF, senior ADF officers and politicians, you know, who are in part responsible for you know, pushing these people beyond their mental resilience. Do you think there is some culpability there, Matt? What's your view?
Well, look, I'm not going to get muddled down on the specifics, but there obviously needs to be a reflection, if you want to call it an inquiry or something, about the decisions that were made. I want to say up front that I think it's been unfortunate that the great work that our military does has been besmirched over the last couple of weeks. I think the vast majority of our soldiers do honourable and brave work. But I also think what this has shown has been that we were in Afghanistan for far too long, that we train people in the army to be warriors. I mean, to be frank, they are trained to kill, and they are very good at that job. But I don't know if, I think this report has shown they're not skilled to be nation builders, and I'm not sure whether decisions we made to stay in these countries, in Iraq as well, or Afghanistan for so long, were the correct ones. Not so sure that should be the role of our armed forces going forward. And obviously we need to reflect on the lessons from this experience and incorporate them in the future. Yeah.
Look, it sounds like Matt's just supported your call for a separate new inquiry. Joel, you know, in terms of your idea of having a separate inquiry into the senior ADF officers and politicians who did, you know, deploy and redeploy these SAS soldiers, you know, what did you see as Defence Minister that concerned you, you know, enough to call for this?
Well, I think our parliamentary inquiry at some point, Shari, would help us both better understand what went wrong and ensure that we learn the lessons so this could never happen again. You know, some of the examples I gave in that article or that opinion piece you referred to earlier were the long and regular rotations. We kept sending our soldiers back again and again and again. Too often they lacked basic resources like the availability of medivacs for wounded soldiers. When I was Defence Minister, I was aghast at reports that too often they weren't as available as as they should have been. We, of course, didn't send our own Black Hawks to act as medivacs at that time. Both the operational and strategic plans were vague and uncertain, and our soldiers on the ground, our trippers on the ground, understand this and, of course, were concerned about it. We threw them into the most dangerous part of the world without those important resources. They fought to rule all the rules in the world, the rules of law, the international law, our local domestic laws, Afghan domestic laws, their own rules of engagement. Yet they were fighting an enemy which played to no rules, and of course an enemy that did not wear a uniform, therefore making it difficult to discern who you could trust and not trust. NATO or ISAF had a capture and release policy, which meant that on a daily basis, our soldiers were risking their lives, often wounded, capturing enemy combatants, only to see them released a short time later under those rules. So no wonder people in the end started to question the strategy and started taking things into their own hands. Now, I'm not justifying that in any way. It was absolutely unlawful, absolutely wrong, absolutely morally wrong. But we melt these guys down and turn them into, as Matt said, warriors. We teach them to kill without too much pressure on their conscience. And they expect, of course, to be supportive, and they certainly expect their government to not only be respectful of the situation they find themselves in, but government to have a plan for operational success. Plenty of tactical success, of course, and that's a great credit to our Special Forces soldiers, but they could see that there was no overall operational or strategic plan, or in other words, a pathway to success.
Yeah, or end to the mission, as you note in that piece, and others have done so as well. That's a lot of food for thought there. I want to change topic, though, to climate change, and then climate change in the Labor Party. Matt Canavan, you know, we've started to see some of Joe Biden's cabinet picks. John Kerry is a key one, and he's expected to take the baton and become, you know, a world leader when it comes to climate change, and there's, you know, concerns that he might start pressuring Australia on this front. You know, do you think this is a topic that Scott Morrison will come under pressure to take further action on? And how do you think we're likely to respond to that?
Well, I think we should respond in our normal way and defend our own national interests and make decisions on behalf of Australians, including the votes and opinions of Australians. I mean, there's been a lot of controversy about the US election. There's been claims of dead people voting, of people voting from interstate. But there's one group that I don't think anyone is accusing of voting in the US election, and that is Australians. I don't think any Australian had a vote in the US presidential election, so I'm not quite sure how or why an election in the US should pressure or change the Australian government's policy on such an important topic to thousands of jobs in our country. We just had a segment before I thought very interesting with James Patterson and Michael Danby, where we forthrightly rebutted the right of or any kind of suggestion that China should have a say over our own domestic policy settings. And likewise, as close a friend as America is, I don't think that we should let the USA decide what is best for Australia. We should make that decision. Now, we did have an election last year, and at that election, the Australian people vociferously backed the Liberal National Party, who wanted to see coal mines built in our country, who wanted to see reasonable reductions in our carbon emissions, but not crazy, fantastical ones. And they certainly backed us to protect the jobs in our coal and mining industries, which I'm sure this government will continue to do.
Yeah. Joel, Anthony Albanese was gifted the Labor leadership after the election when Sholton lost because he promised he would return policy to the centre. Do you think he's broken that promise?
I think he has been tracking the Labor Party back to the centre, Shari. When you reflect on the last 18 months or so, he's reaffirmed Labor's commitment to the coal mining industry. He's backed the further extraction of natural gas, including new projects. He's jettisoned that silly 45% reduction target for 2030. That was nonsensical and would have done
on this policy,
harm to the
climate
economy.
Change.
Well, I think these are all matters related to climate change. These are all matters that are part of the climate change debate. But look, on Joe Biden, I welcome the fact that the US is now coming back to the fold. It's coming back to the Paris Agreement, the arrangement we've all entered into. We did so here in Australia under Malcolm Turnbull. I've no doubt he'll back zero net emissions by 2050, something that most countries are doing.
Quickly,
so
Joel,
that's a good thing.
On Joe Biden, it's been reported that in the shadow cabinet meeting, you objected to Anthony Albanese's claim that the US election result, that Joe Biden's win signalled that he was going to win back seats, you know, off the back of a renewed interest in climate change, that Albo was going to win back seats of this renewed interest in climate change. Obviously, I know you're not going to speak about what happened in shadow cabinet, but I'm asking what your opinion is about the message Biden's win sends on climate change. Does it send any at all?
Well, actually, I took objection to the analysis of two elections coming from a number of, on my own side. One was the Queensland election, and of course, the latter was the US election. And I rejected in both cases the idea that those election results were a call to do even more on climate change. I thought that was a complete misinterpretation of what happened. In Queensland, for example, Anastasia Palaszczuk managed to take a strong environmental policy to the election, but she spent much of her time in regional Queensland. She announced the approval of a very large new coal mine. She visited gas sites, manufacturing plants which are associated with the gas and coal industries, TAFE campuses, where she talked about the skills we need for those traditional blue-collar industries. And of course, to say that Joe Biden won the US election off the back of significant climate change policy is just a complete misrepresentation of what played out there. I don't have time on your show tonight to provide my own analysis, but I'll tell you what, I do remember. I do remember Joe Biden I very vividly remember Joe Biden very loudly shouting his support for coal seam gas, or at least fracking, maybe in the shale gas industry, right in the middle of that campaign. So to say that it was a green light to go harder, look, we need to act on climate change. I back zero net emissions, of course I do, but we don't need to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Okay.
And what Anthony Albanese does need to do more is talk about those people in the blue collar, in the high vis, out there in the regions in particular, working hard proudly every day. Doing what they do for this country. And we can't talk about them often enough.
We're out of time, or maybe we'll see that happening if it's opposition leader Joel Fitzgibbon. Matt, I just want to quickly say I really liked your point about Australians not voting in the US election. It's a great point. We're out of time.
We're not the 51st state yet, Shari. Not yet.
Not. All right, Matt Canavan, Joel Fitzgibbon, thank you very much.
Thanks, team.
Thank you.